What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the poker vlog. It is Saturday, June the 22nd, and I am not at Bellagio. I'm actually at Gold Coast. And the reason that I'm at Gold Coast is that I'm doing a meetup with the Hungry Horse poker folks. So we're going to do the meetup for a few hours, and then from the meetup we're going to head over to Bellagio and get in a poker session. So that's the plan for today. I'm trying to find the bowling alley here right now in Gold Coast, and I think I'm going in the right direction. Yep, according to the sign, I'm going in the right direction. So maybe if we can hear some bowling balls rolling down the bowling alley, we'll be going in the right spot. So that's the plan for today. Hungry Horse meetup. We'll do some bowling, maybe have some drinks and some food. And then we're going to head just down the road here to Bellagio and get in a session at 2-5. So stay tuned. Alright, so we just got done doing some bowling. Haven't bowled in a long time. I bowled a 117 in case you're interested. Not a great score or anything, but it was fun. It was a good time. And now we're just heading out over to Bellagio. So I'll see you at the tables. Seated right away in the sports book, and we get into the action right away as well. As soon as we post our big blind, we look down at the pocket ducks, the deuces. We see a raise from an early position player. He makes it 15 to go. The cutoff decides to put in the $15 call, and I call as well. So we're going to go three ways here to a flop. What do you got for us, dealer? Can we hit a set in this first hand to get things started? No, we cannot. We see Jack 8-10 with two hearts. Pretty wet, pretty dynamic board. Our pocket deuces aren't going to be doing too well on this board. I go ahead and start things off with a check. Under the gun bets 15. Cutoff calls 15, and I am out of there. I get out of there really quick. You know what they say, no set, no bet. Deuces did not work out so well for us out of position. Let's see if we could play a suited connector in position and get it to work well for us. We are on the button, and we are dealt in 6-5 of hearts in position here. Pretty good little suited connector, if I do say so myself. Better yet, we see a player from early position who limps in, and I go ahead and raise it up. I make it 15 to go. Small blind puts in the $15 call, and the player who limped under the gun puts in the call as well. So we're heading three ways here to a flop. And yes, I can already hear the comments. I should have went a little bit larger here pre-flop. Should have made it 20, but that's not what I did. I made it 15, so just keeping it real here. Flop is ace-9-3 with two hearts. Should have went larger pre-flop, should have bet on the flop here as well. Small blind checked, under the gun player checked, and I checked back, and we see the 8 of hearts on the turn, giving us the flush. That checks to me for a second time, and I go ahead and bet here for $25. Had I bet larger pre-flop and I bet on the flop, I'd have a bigger pot here that I was building with my flush, but as played, the pot's a little bit small. But we do get called by the small blind, so we are getting a little action here, and the river is the queen of diamonds. Small blind checks again, and I go ahead and fire out here for a bet of $65 on the river. 65. And this bet puts the small blind a little bit into the tank. He goes a little bit into the thought process here of whether or not he should call or put in a raise. I'm hoping he's going to put in a call. Puts in a raise, it's going to be a little bit sick here on the river. I'm not sure exactly what I would do to a raise. Probably call depending on the sizing, but he ends up folding, and we take down a small one here. with our little suited connector flush that we hit on the turn. Could have been a bigger pot. Again, if I would have raised a little bit more pre-flop and if I would have bet flop, I think I could have successfully built a bigger pot here. About 45 minutes goes by before we pick up another playable hand. This time we've got the jacks, the pocket jiggities, the fish hooks in the under the gun position. I raised it up to 15. We end up getting called by the button, we end up getting called by the small blind, and we end up getting called by the big blind. So we're going to go 4 ways here to a flop. Flop comes down 10-7-4 with 2 diamonds. Small blind starts things off with a check. Big blind starts things off with a check. I think I'm going to be continuation betting here because I think I rate to have the best hand here quite often. And we can get called by a lot of draws and a lot of 10x type of hands. So I fire out for $35. Button puts in the call, small blind gets out of there, and the big blind eventually gets out of there as well. So we're going to go heads up here to a turn card, which is the 7 of hearts. Button calls on the flop. I think they're going to have a lot of 10x hands. I think they're going to have a lot of flush draws in their range. So I don't expect the 7 of hearts to hit that range very often. They will have a 7 occasionally, but I think we still rate to have the best hand. So I'm going to continue firing. I go ahead to count out a bet, and she immediately snap folds her hand before I can even get the bet announced or over the line. So we end up taking this down without any further resistance or any additional value for that matter. But the nice thing is sometimes you wait 45 minutes for a hand, and sometimes if you're lucky, you get premium hands back to back, and that's exactly what happens here. So right after we pick up our pocket jacks, we move on to the next hand in the big blind, and wouldn't you know it, the dealer goes ahead and throws us pocket kings. See it fold to the button, and the button puts in the $15 raise pre-flop. Now I think he's going to be raising here pretty wide on the button, so I don't expect him to have too much of a hand, but I can't just be calling here pre-flop out of position with a hand like pocket kings, can I? Definitely got to put in the 3-bet, so I announce a raise to 55, and it's back over to the button, and he eventually does decide to put in the call. So we're going to go heads up here to a flop out of position with a premium hand. Not a bad spot to be in. What have you got for us, dealer? We see 6-5-3 rainbow. Shouldn't really hit the button's range all that hard. I start things off with a check, as I often would out of position, and he goes ahead and checks it back really quickly here. So off to a turn card, which is a nice one. It's the king of clubs giving us top set. So if for some reason he did have a set of 5s or a set of 3s or a set of 6s on the flop and was slow playing, we just moved ahead. So I lead out for 60 here. Button goes into the tank for a little bit, and I'm praying for a raise or a call or something of that nature so we could start to build the pot or get some value. Unfortunately, we don't get either of those things when the button eventually just lets his cards go. So he ends up folding, and no additional value to be had here with our pocket kings, but we do win 2 pots in a row, which is always a nice thing in No Limit Texas Holdem. About 10 minutes later, we're in the big blind again. This time we've got ace-jack offsuit, and I see a raise from an under-the-gun player. He makes it 15 to go. This player had been pretty active, raising and re-raising quite a bit, so when the small blind puts in the call, I decide to go ahead and defend here and put in the call as well. 3 ways to a flop. What have you got for us, dealer? Let's get something good. We see the queen of clubs, king of hearts, 3 of spades. He hits us a little bit. We've got a gut shot. We've got 1 over, although I don't know if our ace would be any good. Small blind checks. I go ahead and check, and the under the gun player continuation bets here for $20. I think he's going to stab here quite often, although he is betting into 2 opponents, so he could be a little bit stronger here. Could have some top pair hands, could have some 2-pair hands, could have some draws himself, so not quite sure. When the small blind tanks but eventually puts in the call, I think I could go ahead and call here as well. I think if we connect with our 10 on the turn, we might stand a chance of building a pretty nice pot here and getting paid. And I think we're deep enough here to go ahead and play for some stacks if that's the case. So I go ahead and put in the $20 call, and we go 3 ways to a turn card, which does improve us. It is the ace of diamonds, so we do have top pair now with a somewhat decent kicker. Small blind continues with a check, and I go ahead and check as well, and now the under the gun player slows down and checks, and we see the 5 of spades peel off on the river, which I don't think should change too much here. Now the small blind decides he's going to take the betting lead here on this river card. He counts out a bet of $35 and goes ahead and fires it over the bet line. Action is back on me, and you guys can go ahead and burn me in the comments if you want. You can call me a nit, but I didn't like calling here in between 2 opponents. Not sure what the player left behind me is going to do. So I just go ahead and fold and get out of the way. Back to the under the gun player who thinks about things, looks at his cards, does a little Hollywooding, and then he raises. He puts in $125, and the action is now back over to the small blind. This is exactly what I was afraid of with calling in between two opponents. Had I called, he would have bet even larger, or raised even larger, I should say. Now the small blind is in the tank. He does eventually go ahead and fold, and the under the gun player takes down this pot. So I didn't get a chance to see what either of them had, but if I were a betting man, and sometimes I am, I would bet on the fact that we were probably beat here. You know, sometimes when you're really tight at the table, you just don't get any action. I've got ace, king of spades, and I go ahead and raise it up to 15. Player to my direct left folds, but the player in the low jack calls, player in the hijack calls, player in the button calls, player in the small blind calls, and the player in the big blind calls. So apparently being tight at the table doesn't really mean much because, yeah, we've got a multi-way pot here going, to say the least. 6 ways to a flop. Flop is queen 10-9 rainbow. There is one spade out there, and we do have a couple of overs, so we do have some possibilities here, but I go ahead and start things off with a check, and the low jack decides to put out a small bet of $15. Player in the button goes ahead and calls, and I decide to go ahead and peel one off here as well and put in the call for 15. I think it's a pretty good price. We see the 6 of clubs on the turn. Doesn't improve us at all, so I go ahead and start things off with a check once again. Low jack does not slow down. Fires out for $35, and the button thinks about it for a while here. He's tanking a little bit, and I'm thinking about what do I want to do here. Depending on what the button does, I think I'm just going to fold. I don't really see much reason to call here. 6 clubs doesn't give us any more equity. We still just have a draw, and that's about it to a straight. So I think it's just a fold, and I go ahead and get out of there, and we are going to move on to the next one. Once again, ace-king suited lets me down. 10 of spades in this one on the button, and you guys are all going to be proud of me. We see a limper in the cutoff, and I raise it up, but I make it 20 to go. That's right. I raise a little bit larger, isolating the player who limped. Both the blinds get out of the way, and the player in the cutoff puts in the call, so we're going to go heads up here to a flop. Flop comes down, queen of spades, 4 of hearts, 3 of hearts. We got ourselves a pretty wet, dynamic board here, so when the cutoff checks, I fire out a continuation bet here, and I go a little bit on the larger side. I make it 25 to go. Cutoff thinks about it for a little bit, but not too long, and eventually he just lets it go, so we're not going to move on here and see any other cards, which is a good result here when you don't have anything on the flop. Last hand of the session, we moved to a different table. The table in the sportsbook had dried up and it was running a little bit tight, so I got into a different seat inside the room and we looked down at pocket sevens. This is the second hand we've played at this table. I raise it up to 15. It ends up folding around to the player in the big blind who puts in the call. So we're going to go heads up here to a flop. In position, not a bad outcome when you've got a pocket pair. And you know what's an even better result when you've got a pocket pair? When you flop a set. We see 10, 7, 8 with 2 clubs, giving us bottom set on a very, very wet dynamic board. Big blind goes ahead and checks it over to me, and I go ahead and fire out a continuation bet here for $20, and he doesn't think too long at all before basically just snap calling the $20 bet, and we are off to a turn card, and I am praying for a safe one. Put something out there that helps me, dealer. He hears my prayers and puts out the 10 of spades on the turn, giving me a full house, and the big blind checks once again. I am not going to be checking. I fire out for $55 on this turn, and the big blind, he doesn't think too long at all before announcing a raise. He goes with a relatively small sizing, though. He makes it 125 to go. With this sizing, I think he's going to have a lot of 10x hands. I think he's going to have some draws. So the question is do I want to go for all of it now, or do I just want to call and see what develops on the river? I think the answer to that question is I want to go for all of it now. So I go ahead and announce all in. He doesn't think too long at all and basically snap calls, which has me a little concerned here. We could be beat. He could have a hand like 10-8 and we are drawing dead. The The river ends up being an inconsequential card, though. I turn over my full house, and he turns over 9 6 of hearts. He flopped the straight, and we just ended up outdrawing him and getting a full house on the turn. Just a sick cooler here and a nice pot. Always nice to be on the right side, the positive side of a sick cooler every once in a while. I've been on the other side many times in my poker career, so occasionally it is nice to be on the right side, the good side of a big cooler. Unfortunately, this table ended up breaking shortly after this. We played for about another 30 minutes or so, and there was a bunch of players at the table who were just up walking around. The other players at the table decided they didn't want to play four-handed and five-handed, so then a couple players decided they wanted to leave, so I just decided to pack up and leave as well and call it a night. So this ended up being the last big pot we played, really the last hand we played of the session. So we ended it on a high note, and we ended booking a win. I will see you all in the outro. All right, so I just got done playing at Bellagio. The people in front of me here are flashing their hazards at me for some reason. Not sure what's going on there. Anyway, it's about 9:30 at night, and we played for about 3.5 hours. We were in the game for 500, didn't have to rebuy, and we ended up cashing out for $9.45 for a profit of $4.45. So the first game that I sat at wasn't that good. It was pretty tight, not a lot of action, and I find that the overflow tables in the sports book, so during the World Series of Poker, they put 8 additional tables out in the sports book. I find those games usually aren't that good. Some players say the games out there are better. I disagree. I don't think they're better. I've been there twice, and both times I've sat down there, the tables are not terribly good. So FYI, if you're in Vegas in the future during the World Series of Poker and you're playing poker at Bellagio, I recommend trying to get a seat in the room if you can. I think it's better. Personal opinion, personal anecdotal experience and personal opinion. So the Hungry Horse meetup was good. That was fun. Shout out to Mark Goon and the Hungry Horse crew for putting that one on. It was a fun event. It was good to meet folks in person, people that I had only seen on virtual calls in the past. Always good to shake people's hands and have a drink and bowl, do some bowling. It's a good time. So that's going to do it for episode 52. 1 year's worth of weekly poker vlogs done. Believe it or not, done. 1 year's worth of poker vlogs. So if you like this, please do hit that like button. Consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future episodes. And I'm going to see you guys in episode 53. Coming up pretty quick here. I'm probably going to be getting out and doing a session tomorrow, which will end up being episode 53. So stay tuned for that. I'll see you guys soon. Peace.